Well, welcome everybody back to session 2 of the FET Summer School. So delighted to have you all back. For those of you who are with us in session 1, welcome back. And for those of you who didn't manage to make session 1 but are catching up to you are most welcome. So just before we start, I'd just like to say if you need closed captions, there is a bar right down the bottom of the Zoom window. You'll find a closed captions button there, and you should be able to add your subtitles if you need them. And we would ask that if everybody could keep themselves muted throughout the session, unless you're being called upon, if you're speaking, or unless you've put up your hand to speak, which we can talk about in a moment. Just my own name is Dara Ryder. I'm the CEO of AHEAD, and AHEAD are an NGO focused on creating inclusive environments in education and employment for people with disabilities. I'm here with my co-facilitator today, Dr. Tom Tobin, who's a UDL expert and broadcasting to us from Pennsylvania today. So how are you, Tom? How are you doing?
Doing well, Dara, and we're grateful to see a lot of people coming back for session 2 who are here in session 1. And if this is your first time working with us, please know that this is meant to be an interactive hour together. So please have somebody near the keyboard at your location for responding in the chat feature. Or if you look at the bottom of your screen under the participants menu is where you can use the raise hand feature. And that's a way to let us know that you'd like to come on the live microphone and interact with us. We are interruptible today. So if you have an idea, a question, something sparking for you, please come on in and be part of the conversation. So,
also useful to say, if you are watching on a laptop and you happen to have a second device like a wee phone to hand, we're also going to be using Menti for some of our interactions, or as an option for some of our interactions. So if you wanted to go to menti.com and have that ready as you go, that would be very useful. So we're going to get started today actually by introducing one of my colleagues, because over the next couple of sessions, one of the things we'd like to do ahead is just introduce you to some friendly faces within our organization, maybe to give them a very quick, get a very quick overview of them on the work that they're doing that might be useful for you as FET practitioners. So Hannah, are you there?
Yeah, hi Dara.
So Hannah Kelly is the Get Ahead coordinator, and I'm going to leave it to her to tell you what her work is all about.
Brilliant, thanks Dara. So yeah, as Dara said, I'll be very quick, just run through the program that I coordinate. So the program Get Ahead basically has been running as a program from AHEAD since 2005. The program works with students and graduates on that transitional kind of period between while they're studying and then into graduate employment. So we do this through a number of different channels that we use. Most recently, during COVID, we launched our Facebook peer-to-peer group for students who could, post and get advice or ask questions from their peers about supports maybe in college, that sort of thing. A big part of the program is the workshops, the upskilling workshops that we do as well. So these will be on a range of different topics like CV writing, or disclosure is a big one, and then also interview skills and using LinkedIn profiles, things like that. And the workshops depend. Sometimes they're run independently. We advertise them to our database of students and grads. Sometimes we work directly with colleges, so we'll link up with colleges and do a specific maybe disclosure workshop there. And then a lot of the time we're linking up with the employers that we work with too, and they'll host in their workplaces. Obviously now it will be online, but they would host the workshop for us on a skill set maybe they think would be important, a soft skill that they think would be important for students and grads to know. Then another big part of the program, and a big date in the calendar year for Get Ahead, is Building the Future. So Building the Future is our careers event for students and graduates with disabilities, and this year we actually have just launched this event yesterday for this year. Typically it happens in May, but COVID, like everyone else, that has changed the plan a little bit, so we've reimagined the event this year. And it's happening online as a week-long event from Monday the 24th to Friday the 28th of August. So there, students, it's much like any careers fair that you'd find, generally, except it's a little bit more tailored for students or graduates with disabilities. So there's mock interviews, CV clinics, and employer drop-in sessions where graduates and students can get that face-to-face contact, ask about accessibility or roles that are on offer currently in that workplace. We also have workshops on every day on a range of different topics, some disability specific, others more general soft skill kind of workshops as well. And so that's taken part for that whole week in tandem with the employers that we work with too. So if you're looking to find out more about that event, you can find that on our webpage, which is up on your screen now, ahead.ie/building the future. So that's live for advertising now, so students can register. Everything is pre-booked for that week, so they register at that link there. And you can keep up to date with stuff that's happening in Get Ahead through our mail, through the Ahead mail out that goes out once a week, which I myself put together. So I do like to make sure there's Get Ahead in there quite often. So you can sign up to that through our website, so ahead.ie as well. You can find there. So that's basically the program in a nutshell. And you can at the Get Ahead website there, you can ahead.ie/get ahead. You can read more about the program in more depth.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for that, Hannah. That's
no problem.
Brilliant. I think Lorraine has posted in the chat there some
brilliant.
So just before we move on quickly, Tom, just a very quick thanks to Solus and ETBI who have co-commissioned Ahead to undertake the UDL for FET project. We talked about it on Monday, so we won't go in depth into it again. And I think it's time to get started, Tom, on the content of today. What do you think?
I think it is, and everybody is taking our suggestion to heart. There's a couple of questions in the chat, and Trish Dalton has her hand up to come on the live mic. Let me check on those chat questions real quick. We have a question from Caroline who says, will the slides and other things be available post-session? Yes, they will. Watch your email for those. And Trish Dalton, you wanted to come on the microphone. Did you have a question for Hannah or for us? And Trish, if you wanted to come on the live microphone, you just unmute yourself and come on with us. If you were just practicing, just put in the chat and let us know. No worries, but if you do want to come onto the live conversation using the microphone or using chat, that's entirely grand to do. And what I'd like to do real quick is, if you had an opportunity to be with us for session 1 a couple of days ago, we talked about Carol Neenan and her conversation about going to nightclubs and the metaphor that she used with all of her students in order to have the students keep engaged with her. And that was a grand story, but she was actually talking about using universal design for learning principles. And the principle was giving people more than one way, +1, to stay engaged. And we're looking at, as a recap, providing options for recruiting interest. In other words, just getting people interested in the first place, giving them more than one way for that to happen. Then once you're engaged with them and you want to interact with your students, if you want your students to interact with materials, with each other, with the wider world, how do we give people more than one way to stay engaged? And then once they're started down the road of working on projects, learning new things, doing new skills with us, how do we help them manage their time and manage their attention in a way that supports them and doesn't reduce the rigor of our content, but lowers the barrier for getting access in the first place? So that's the 3 different parts of multiple means of engagement. And I'd like to shift over to the results from the Menti activity that everybody was working on. And one way that you could improve learner engagement in your teaching activity, we saw that a number of people emailed their responses to our colleague Christine Hines, and I want to shout out one of them that said, I probably overthought this, but I created this response journal assignment and activity for my learners. There's no such thing as overthinking it. It can be as simple as you need it to be, or you can really dive in, because universal design for learning is not a set of specific practices. It's a mindset, it's a framework, it's an approach. And Cohen is saying that found this checklist and thought it was super useful. The Rhode Island Modified UDL Educator Checklist. Thank you for the link there. That's awesome. And let's take a look at some of the responses that people put in here. I'm teaching a hairdressing course, and I think being a learner too and showing my own struggles and mistakes could help my learners see possibilities. Absolutely. One of the barriers that we can lower is that we are practitioners in our fields and we're still learning. And we can also tell people, when I first started working on this problem, here are the kinds of mistakes I made. Here are the kinds of assumptions I had. And being a learner alongside of our learners is a wonderful way to do that. Here's a couple other ones. I teach special needs assisting. I bring my students to a special school for a visit so they can connect some of the theory with the real world. So if I'm teaching behavioral techniques in the class, they can actually see how it works in the special school. So giving students an opportunity to engage directly with the people they're going to work with in their careers or in the subject matter that you are teaching is a wonderful way to talk theoretically as one option, and then having the real experience, having those ideas and questions here. And we've been talking about those QQI standards. Here's one where somebody's directly referring to them. I work with QQI level 6 business students, and content is text heavy. I try to incorporate drawing, and I can include short audio or video clips as starting points for reflection and discussion. So you notice that nobody's trying to necessarily cover all the different possibilities, but they're just doing what we called in session 1 +1 thinking. If there's one way for an interaction to happen now, think of just one more way that that could go, and that makes it a little bit more manageable. I'm going to scroll quite a bit here, and I've got one more item here that I want to share with everybody. On your screen, it says, I work with students with mild intellectual difficulties, and one activity I find helpful is asking them to find information online on a topic. So let's say we're talking about the muscular system. Then they'll print it off, and we use the pictures to create a vision board and co-create. So that's actually not +1 thinking. And this is, I want to slide into this for this session as well. +1 thinking is giving students options for that particular assignment. If you just say, okay, go out and find some pictures and then let's all use those pictures to collaborate, that's actually asking people to do things in one format and then another. So another example of this is watch this video, then read another article, and then maybe listen to a podcast in sequence. Sequential variety just means that everybody's going to have to do the same 3 things in the same order. But if it's watch this video or read this text, and you get the same information from both, or watch this video or listen to this podcast, and that's a way to start your engagement and get people reflecting. That's universal design for learning, giving them choices in the moment about how they interact in specific things. And I want to turn it over to Dara because he's going to talk a little bit about what we're going to get into in this session, session 2.
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting one, and I mean, all the universal design for learning principles flow into each other. We know that, Tom. So I suppose this one flows in, but from a little bit from what you're saying just there as well. So in the pre-session exercise, many of you, if you just go back one piece there, Tom, just go. That was okay. Just one more piece, yeah. So in the pre-session exercise, many of you actually highlighted that you often have to make changes to an individual student's coursework in order for them to be able to interact with the material. So what we're going to look at really today is, what if you could bake those options right into the design and the delivery of the course so that all your students can benefit from the choice? So the bottom line here really is that FET learners will do better when they can choose how they take in the information and interact with the contents and the materials that we provide. So one of the core principles of universal design for learning is looking just at that piece in terms of the delivery of information, and it's all about providing multiple means of representation. So we'll also ask you a little later where your students don't come prepared for your interactions, and we'll look at that together and look at maybe creating some effective responses for that issue. And we'll hear from a FET practitioner who's using TEL strategies to bring the UDL representation principle to life in his own maths course, and to offer students choices in how they interact with the course content. And really, I think it's time to get started with some serious interaction. What do you think, Tom?
I think that's a good idea. And you probably saw that I had skipped forward a couple of slides. So if you were really speed reading, you knew what we were going to do right now. We'd like to share out and get your ideas and your interaction. So think about the subject that you teach, the program in which you are a practitioner, and think about all of the different interactions that you have with your students over the course of a term or throughout an entire course. Can you think of one interaction where your students haven't done the reading or they're not prepared for that particular lesson every single time you teach that thing? What's one thing there? You can please post that in the chat. We're going to put 2 minutes on the clock, or you can raise your hand and we'll bring you onto the microphone after the 2 minutes are up, or you can go to menti.com and you see on your screen the code is 283393 for today. So we'll put 2 minutes of some quiet time here and give you an opportunity. And I'm going to ask our colleague Lorraine, who's here with us, she's going to keep watch in the chat and give voice to some of the comments that are coming in and see if we've got some themes that we're going to put together. So we'll put 2 minutes on the clock and go ahead and share with us what's one thing that you teach. The students just aren't prepared or they're not ready. All right, Grant, we're getting close to the end of our 2 minutes time. And I'm actually going to start with our colleagues over on Menti, if you don't mind. Let me flip over here. And let's just give some voice to some of these ones here. So reading handouts that I give out in class, reading the instructions. Yeah, all the time it happens. Anything that involves a lot of theory and potentially a lot of writing. Theory, legislation, theory reading, any theory work. I think we have a theme developing here. Let's see, subjects that are not visual or more abstract. Mock theory exams have not learned the theory. Yeah, I think we're getting a pretty good theme going here. Image processing, hairdressing. They're not prepared when it comes to the theory. English literature, not for reading a text or not having mind maps ready. Work experience, complex or unfamiliar topics. I reckon 95% of my students would never engage in prior learning unless it was a requirement for them to be paid and they were being tested on it. Strangely enough, that's actually a practical approach. Is this going to be on the test? Is this going to be something that I'm going to need to know? Let me scroll down a little bit and see. We've got a lot of people sharing here on Menti, which is awesome. They don't prepare for classes where they have to give a specific answer or have specific outcomes. I ask people to practice the new skill during the week in my parenting course and setting boundaries or feedback in the next session, and they rarely do so. And Lorraine, have you seen some themes coming up in the chat as well?
Yeah, so very similar themes to what you said around, people sometimes maybe not seeing stuff as relevant. So where it links into, why does that link into another subject? So relevance to what they're doing. So, difficult subjects like policy, strategy, and the obvious ones, like, as you said, not doing the homework. Again, difficult subjects, bringing stuff into class. Even as a facilitator myself over the years, that was always a difficult one, where you tell people to bring stuff in and of course they don't. So you always have to bring extra stuff just to be sure that you have stuff on the day. So people have actually tried solutions like providing videos and templates, but I think it's just one of those ongoing people have to deal with.
Absolutely. And we've got a couple of participants who have their hands up. Trish Dalton, you have your hand up. Did you want to come on the microphone and share your response?
I think Trish just might have had her hand up from earlier on.
I think that was earlier on, yeah.
All right, we'll put that hand down. And do know that if you want to come onto the live microphone, just put your hand up and we'll recognize you to do that. And I'm seeing some other things in the chat here too, Lorraine, and it sounds like we've got some common themes here. It's about when we're asking people to encounter new subjects on their own. So if we're asking them to look at policy or theory,
Yeah,
I saw one for, you know, data for spreadsheets or object-oriented databases. And then also when we're asking people to do drafts or when we're asking people to practice, sometimes they're not prepared. And I've also seen a couple of people in the chat saying, you know, I made a study guide just for them. I made a video just for them, and they never look at it. And that's actually one of the things that we want to dive in on with this particular session of our FET Summer School. And the reason I'd like you to think about where is that one place where your students are poorly prepared, this is a wonderful way to know where to start doing universal design for learning practices. So thank you everyone for sharing your ideas and your responses here. It's also time to do a little myth busting. And with the myth busting, think about the biggest reason that your students aren't prepared. It's that they have a lack of access to the materials when they're not with you. That's one thing that can happen very often. So we heard in a lot of the examples that they have the reading, but they don't have access to context for it, or they don't have access to how much of this should I be reading, or how in depth should I be going? Should I just be skimming? Should I get the general understanding of it? Or should I be reading every single possible detail in what I'm looking at? The other part of it is with regard to, and I see a couple of people rolling through and people agreeing with Joshua Golding saying adult or older learners or non-accredited courses will often opt out of doing the homework or the work outside the classroom. That's usually because they may have other time commitments. So they're caring for young children at home, especially now in COVID-19 times. They might be caring for aged parents. They have work responsibilities. And so they're trying to jam their education into an already busy life. And those of us in FET, we also have students who have language barriers, processing barriers, or just preparedness barriers, that they don't really know how to be a student because they've been away from school for a long time, or they don't have other people in their family who have been through the kind of educational experiences that we're providing. And so they can't just ask their brother or their parents, oh, how did that go? Or how do I do this? So as we're thinking about all of those myths to bust, universal design for learning can help us in order to be able to feel like they can actually get moving here. And Paula has a good idea in the chat. She said, if we were able to give marks for outside of class engagement, then that would be incentive, and it could be built into our marking schemes. And you actually can do that. You can make the work that people are doing on their own part of the grade for things that they do in the class as well. And someone who's logged in as client 7.20, and so you can actually change your name, by the way, and tell us who you really are. But the client 7.2.0 says, when students feel that it will be too difficult for them, they're reluctant to trust us to help them to understand. They put up a barrier, they're afraid to dip their toe in. And this is where universal design for learning comes in very much. And this is a wonderful, wonderful segue into our guest presenter for today. And I'm going to turn it back over to Dara to introduce one of our FET colleagues who actually overcame a lot of the barriers that we've been talking about in his class.
Indeed, and we talked a lot about how, you know, we're looking at the principles as individual sessions here, but all of these three principles of beauty are very highly intertwined. We talked a lot there about relevance, and a lot of the piece about relevance is why, the why of learning, which is back to the engagement piece. So we use the representation principle to further stimulate engagement, and there's all of this intertwining that's going on between them. So I'm delighted that Dave has joined us today, Dave Mulvaney. If you could, I think we might move along. Do we have a picture of Dave somewhere? Maybe not. Yes. Dave Mulvaney, who is a FET practitioner in Crumlin Youth Reach Centre. And Dave is going to talk to us about how providing occupation-specific examples from hairdressing and from cookery, and providing multiple ways for learners to take in information, help them to engage with his online maths course. So Dave, you get ready to share your screen, please. That would be fantastic.
Thanks, Darren. Okay, I'm ready to go.
Take it away.
Great. So I teach in Crumlin Youth Reach. Youth Reach is a national program, and the aim of Youth Reach is to develop the core skills needed for further learning and to prepare young people to progress to further education, training, or employment. Although it's a national program, no two centres or learners are the same. Centres tend to reflect or respond to the locality where they are based. So in Crumlin, the majority of our learners participate in QQI level 4 subjects. So up until about 2 years or so ago, I had no idea what universal design for learning was. And it wasn't until I had heard the term UDL being bandied around at a CPD that I was prompted to spend some time sort of researching UDL and multiple means of engagement, representation, and expression. I discovered I was inadvertently using features of UDL, so I set about improving what I was doing. So over the next 8 minutes or so, I'll show you some examples of how I provide multiple means of representation to my learners. So of the subjects I teach, maths is the one that is hated the most. When learners come to me for the first time, many of them have low expectations. They have poor self-esteem, very negative past experiences of schooling. They seem to have developed a deep-rooted hatred of maths and don't see the point in it. But over time, I discovered that mathematical concepts weren't really explained or delivered in a way that interested them or in a way that they could understand. And apart from this cohort, then, I also had learners who did not have a strong grasp of the English language. So by using multiple means of representation and tell tools, I attempted to engage them. So one of the most commonly used tools in the classroom is Microsoft PowerPoint. And I like to use PowerPoint in classrooms when I have more than one nationality. PowerPoint has a specific add-in so that within slideshows, within the slideshow tab, I can sort of translate whatever it is that I say into a language of my choice and display the translated subtitles on the board. So this is activated in slideshows, and basically I just press start subtitles. When I do, I'm prompted to, you know, decide what language I want to display. And I have about 60 odd languages that I can pick from. Before the presentation starts, PowerPoint automatically connects to the Microsoft Translator app. So you can get this on your phone, it can be on the laptop. And if I happen to have several nationalities in the class, these learners can use a unique code that's generated exclusively for this class. So with the code, learners can access a translation in their chosen language, and it's through any device. Again, it could be desktop, laptop, or phone. This app is free. You can translate text to speech. You can have conversations translated, multilingual conversations over multiple devices. I've tried it with seven different nationalities in the same classroom, and it's worked perfectly. And I think most importantly, learners can save the translations relating to the class. This is how the presentation appears on the board. So my PowerPoint appears just up on the screen, but with what I have selected. Now I can only select one specific language, but using the app, if I have 3 or 4 different nationalities, they will get the translation down onto their device. I found that classes flow much better because, sorry, I'll go back a bit. These are all great for when I'm teaching and when I have a PowerPoint to look at. But when the lesson has been done, I tend to use a blank screen or a blank PowerPoint, and I'd still have the translator working because I've found that the classes flow a lot better. Learners can keep up with what's going on because I could have somebody asking me, you know, a specific type of question that somebody else might not pick up on or understand. And if I keep the blank PowerPoint up on the board, everything flows an awful lot better. Usually when the classes finish, I like to post everything up on the Moodle for students to go back to afterwards. And depending on how many nationalities I may have in the class, this usually dictates how many iterations of the recording I'll try and make available. And I'd always, in addition to this, post up one with closed captions for English speakers. To accompany the PowerPoints, I'd always include the text-based version of the PowerPoint. And the reason behind this is because it gives learners the freedom to use the immersive reader. And this gives them the ability to manipulate the text to suit their own personal needs and including translations. One other tell tool I like to use is Nearpod. And a lot of people would say, oh, you should be a salesman for Nearpod, but the examples I'm going to show over the next couple of minutes, I've created in Nearpod, and it's on quite a difficult concept for my learners to get their head around, which is the quadratic formula. So Nearpod it's instructional software basically that engages learners with interactive learning experiences. With Nearpod, the learners have the ability to participate in lessons that contain virtual reality, 3D objects, FET simulations, and a lot more. A lot of their interactive software includes activities like open-ended questions, polls, quizzes, and collaborative boards. Nearpods, they're sort of like fun interactive presentations. So initially I would present these to the learners through their tablets or phones, and I'd also have it on the whiteboard simultaneously. Once I brought learners through the lesson, I make it available to them again on Moodle. So learners can then access the lesson and go back through it at their own pace. And it's at this point where Nearpod sort of comes to, well, it appeals to me because learners can use the features in Nearpod that facilitate multiple means of representation. They're created very easily. It's a simple drag and drop. If you have existing PowerPoints or PDFs of your lessons, they can just drag and drop in. And it's after this has happened that you can start to add the features. So I'll just go through a couple of the features. So apart from the text that is common to all presentations, audio recordings can be added to each individual slide. Any slide that you create in Nearpod also contains a link to an immersive reader. Videos can be inserted into Nearpod either from YouTube or your own files. Because of the type of learner I have, I try to create sort of jazzy, busy videos that will grab and then hold their attention for a little bit. So this is just a tiny excerpt from one of the videos that I use. So as you can see from that, I like the whole sort of color coordinated bit. So when I'm trying to teach new formula and the steps involved in populating them, I've found that color coordinating the pertinent parts allows the learners to follow the numbers throughout the process. And they find it quite easy as well. The final example of multiple means of representation within Nearpod is this simulator. Unfortunately, I couldn't create a link to the simulator to show a live version. But learners can use this simulator within Nearpod to check their own work. But more importantly, it helps them to conceptualize and see what it is they are actually trying to find. Moving on a bit, so when it comes to assessments, I try to engage the different learners by tailoring the questions to the individual. Within the questions, the numbers remain the same and the answers for each question will be the same. But what this sort of enables is for the learners to see the application for them in a real context. So the three examples I have here are hairdresser, chef, builder. I may have an electrician start next week, so I would tailor the question to suit what he wants to do and what his interest is. And it generally provokes an interest in learning. This is another example. It's an example relating to ratios. Again, the numbers remain the same, the answers remain the same, and these simple adjustments change the mindset of learners. They don't become model students overnight, but they do have more interest in a bit of learning. Another tell tool I like to use is Edpuzzle. So Edpuzzle promotes active learning by adding notes and comments to a video. I've a couple of arrows down here highlighting where I've inserted notes and comments. And again, can't create a link to this to show you a live version. But, the video prompts responses from learners and they have to engage, otherwise the video won't continue for them. And my final example, this is my pièce de la résistance, is this periodic style table of math symbols and meanings. This was a resource that I found online. It was a labor of love to construct, and it takes up almost one wall of my classroom. It is an amazing feature, but more importantly, it has been very useful referencing tool for learners. Each element is printed on an A4 size page. I've spent hours cutting them to size and knitting them together to go up on the wall, but it has been very, very useful in helping learners to learn and remember the vocabulary and symbols in maths. And thank you, Dara and Tom. That's me done.
All right, thank you very much, Dave. And while you've been presenting, we've been having a wonderful conversation in the chat, and we've got some things that people have been asking, like, is Microsoft Presentation Translator, is that free? Yes, it is.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
We posted a link to it in the chat, and a couple of people got a little despairing, and they said, goodness, Dave has all these different things, and these are 17,000 tools that I need to learn, and now my students need to learn. But how many years did it take you? And you did it one little piece at a time, right? Yeah,
as new learners appeared, I looked for, and it wasn't just me finding it. It was colleagues suggesting, oh, you should do this or you should do that. And I think Twitter was great for me because that's where I will see an awful lot of stuff that, new technologies. I did take part as well in the TEL mentoring program in the City of Dublin ETB. That was fantastic. That put me onto an awful lot of this technology.
Wonderful. And what I'm seeing is, in all of the things that Dave has been talking about, he's been using his learners' challenges as the places where he's been trying to figure out where to put multiple means of representation. And this is what I'd like to do right now, is I'd like to talk about the UDL behind what you just heard in Dave's story. And what we're talking about with multiple means of representation is, if there's one way for your students to get information, so if you're asking them to read something, you're asking them to watch a video before they come to class, during class, you're lecturing to them. During class, you're asking them to work on problems with you. All of those things, if there's one way for that to happen now, give them just one more way, multiple means of representing information. And you saw that Dave presented a lot of different kinds of things that he's using, but the big theme around them is he gave his students multiple means for perceiving information. So using that translator app and allowing his students on their mobile devices to translate what he's talking about into their own language if they are not English language first people or they're English language learners. Providing alternatives for the visuals and audio. So whenever Dave had a visual, or he had created a video, or he had a video up on YouTube, you saw that he had captions available for that. Now, did he create every single one of those? YouTube's auto captioning feature is actually pretty good, and you can edit the captions that the automatic feature makes. So that saves you a lot of time and fuss. And he offered ways for people to customize how they worked with the information, and all those Nearpod examples allowed students to look at text or look at the mathematical representations. You'll also notice that Dave didn't go high tech on everything. Those pieces of paper that he posted on his board, low tech is a completely good way to do universal design for learning. The technology, the tools, they are not the point here. The point is giving people options for language, math expression, and symbols. So how they interact, whether that's with a pen and a piece of paper, or if they have technology tools available to them, Dave was thinking in both of those ways. He was clarifying structures. He was clarifying the vocabulary and the symbols to be used, those big A4 pieces of paper with the vocabulary terms from his class, so people could just go up and look at them. He's checking for understanding and progress throughout by asking his students to share what they know. And if they don't know or they don't understand, he's saying things in different ways. In fact, we did that in the chat. A couple people said, hey, what's this multiple means of representation? Could you say that differently? And so we took an opportunity to say it in different terms. The last piece that Dave was doing was providing options for comprehension. He was making sure that he was referring to the background knowledge that his students had. And I saw in the chat when Dave put up, here's the problem set if you're in hairdressing. Here's the problem set if you're in web design. Here's the problem set if you're in carpentry. And it was a similar problem, but it relied on things that his students were already familiar with. And Dave had a few of these in his back pocket so that when he had a number of students in his maths class who came from these various programs, he was able to give them problems that were relevant to what they wanted to accomplish. And providing those options for comprehension helped him to highlight patterns, highlight the big ideas, highlight the relationships. We've been doing that throughout our sessions so far by thinking about what are the themes in all of your responses? What are the big picture ideas that help you to understand and then perhaps to practice? And you can do the same thing with your students as well. Suzanne has just put into the chat, photos and labels of tools and names around the room work well as a low-tech option. I love it. Thank you for that suggestion in the chat. Splendid. And last piece, Dave is guiding information processing for his students. He's giving them models for how to work through the problems. And he's showing them that there isn't just one way to approach the information that he is presenting. So to recap, in Universal Design for Learning, we have the three different big principles. The first one was multiple means of engagement. The one we're working on now is multiple means of representation. So how do you represent information? And the last one that we'll work on next time is multiple means of action and expression. And we've got a couple of questions here, and it's time to have some questions. And I'm going to turn it over to Dara in just a second, but let me answer these questions from the chat. Solomon is asking, can you suggest UDL evaluation tools or a set of criteria in order to select an application suitable for a group of learners? And because Universal Design for Learning is a framework, there's not going to be a checklist that you can say, yes, this tool is UDL friendly and that tool is not. But if you're thinking about the tools that you're using, do they have options for how the information is displayed? Dave, for example, took Microsoft PowerPoint and he found the free PowerPoint translator add-in that allowed him to give the information in more than one way. If you're using a technology tool or you're thinking about adopting one, what you can do is you can look for the VPAT. That's the Voluntary Product Accessibility Template. And I just put the VPAT into the chat, and the makers of the software should have one of these, and it will show you how they give the information in more than one way. So excellent question there. And let's see, Cohen saying embodied activities are low-tech options too. Do you agree or disagree? Those kinds of things. And Carrie Archer, who is part of our programming here, you're going to hear from her pretty soon, I think in session 3. She says feedback from learners when you're trying new things out is so important. Be guided by their voices. And that's actually a wonderful way to figure out where to start with your universal design for learning efforts. If you're trying to make every single piece of content or information in your class more accessible or +1 in its design, you're going to burn yourself out. There's not enough time, there's not enough energy to work on all of that. And when Dave presented all of his wonderful series of things that he's done, it took him a long time, and he started out by listening to where his students were struggling in the first place. And that's where Dave started with all of those things. So Cohen's got some resources that he's posting in here, which is grand. And Carrie will be joining us in session 4. Thank you, Dara, for the presentation check. And I'm actually going to turn it over to Dara. He's going to talk a little bit about some next steps for you, and then we're going to do a closing exercise.
Yeah, so we're almost coming to the end of session 2 of the summer school. And the next steps, I suppose, is that our next session, first of all, is taking place next Monday at 2 p.m. And that session is going to be focused on the principle of providing multiple means of action and expression. And you'll receive an email. It should pop into your inbox about 3 o'clock today with a post-session activity from today. So the exercise that we would like you to do is, we'd like to think about how you're currently teaching and how you're giving information to your learners. We'd like to look at one specific learning interaction and look at the types of materials and information that you would typically want them to experience in that interaction. And then we want you just to brainstorm a few additional ways to create just one additional format. So using that +1 idea, one additional format that you can deliver the exact same information that they require to interact with that that part of your course. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you 2 options to talk about that. You can either email Christine Hines, so Christine is at, her email address is up there, and you'll no doubt have had contact with Christine and throughout the project, or you can do it via Padlet. So Padlet is actually, it's basically if you feel like a kind of I would nearly call it a collage board of different ideas that you can put together. So this particular Padlet link that we've put up is a Padlet link specific to this exercise. And it means you can go there, you can post images, you yourself can post voice recordings or a video or something else that you would like to demonstrate. This is the way you another idea that you have for your learners to drop in additional formats. Do you want to say anything else on that, Tom?
Yeah, actually, I'd like to, and Alan's got a question. Monday's class is 11 a.m. No, the due date for this activity is 11 a.m. And next Monday and Thursday, we'll be here at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Irish time, just like these sessions have been. We'd ask you to get the activity done a little bit ahead of time so that we can take a look at your responses and share them and give voice to them in our sessions as well. So good question, and thank you.
And there will also be an email landing in your inbox tomorrow, which will have both the video from today's session, it will have the join link for Monday's session, and it will also have another very short exercise to tee us up for the action and expression section of our Monday session, to give us a little bit of backdrop. So,
Dara, do you mind if I say something a little controversial?
Sure.
All right. Now, when you all go back to your context, you go back to your instructors' meetings, you go back to your staff conversations, you're in the hallway having a water cooler conversation. When we can go back to our centers after the pandemic, I hope that there will be an after the pandemic. But when you are talking to your colleagues who haven't been at these presentations, and we're not done yet, all you people saying thanks for the presentation, let me say something controversial. We also want all of you to be our secret, sneaky evangelists for inclusive design, universal design for learning. One way that you can do that is that when you are talking with your colleagues, they're going to say, oh, did you come back from that workshop about people with disabilities? I don't have any people with disabilities in my class. I'll just wait until I get that paperwork. And that's making an accommodation. That's making one change one time for one person. And that's actually terribly resource intensive. We don't see it coming. We end up doing a lot of work for one person, and it's work that we should be doing. But our colleagues can get a little mad about that. They can say, I thought I had all my prep done. Universal design for learning, and Rosalind says we need to be loud and proud evangelists. I kind of like sneaky because it actually is more effective. And when we make changes ahead of time, before day one of the class even begins, that lowers access barriers for students, whether that's access barriers for getting engaged, like we talked about in session 1, or it's barriers for getting access to the information and content like we're talking about here. We are actually making it less necessary for students to say, hey, by the way, I have an accommodation need. We're never going to get rid of those accommodation needs, but we can lower the need to do so in the first place. And that is a benefit for everybody. And the last benefit I want to make plain for everyone is, especially with the COVID pandemic going on, oftentimes our students, their only way to interact with us is through their mobile devices. Almost all the things you heard in Dave Mulvaney's connection today have a mobile access friendly piece to them. And Dave is still here with us, and I'd like to open it up to one more thing. And what's your one big takeaway? And of course, on your screen, you're going to see the same visual pun that we ended with in our session 1. We've got some Chinese takeaway on the screen, but we're talking about a different kind of takeaway. What's the one big thing that you want to try, that you're already doing, and we've underlined it as important? Or what's one question that you want to ask us, me, Dara, Dave, Lorraine, any of our colleagues here? What's one thing that you want to try? And for your takeaways, we don't have a Menti set up, but if you'd like to raise your hand using the participants link or just key it into the chat, what's your one big thing from this session? I'll take a pause and let everybody collect your thoughts and put them in here. Damien says, I feel like I've been recruited to be a UDL secret agent. Well, you sort of have. And we'd love it to hear what you're doing in your own context, in your own places. And Lorraine and I are going to be taking a look at the chat here. Let's see. Patricia Hanley says, using additional learning tools will also make learning more fun. Oh yeah, that's right, it will. And let's see, Sharon saying variety. Karen says, putting things on the wall to support learning. Yeah, absolutely. The environment in which your students are learning with you has a big impact on how engaged they stay.
And can I just add, Thomas, as well, just about the closed caption, because people have asked that a few times. And myself and my colleague Trevor, give a shout out to Trevor, I know he's somewhere in the ether, that we actually did do a session on how to add PowerPoint and stuff. So there is actually some stuff on our website that people can access as well.
Great.
So
thank you very much. And along the lines of closed captioning, that's just a +1 way of giving information. And Shay and Ashling are talking about that +1 thinking. That's actually something in my UDL book that I came up with the idea that universal design for learning is a lot about neuroscience and the chemical pathways in your brain when you learn things. But at its heart, it's really, if there's one way to do something, give people one more option. Now, ideally, we should give them a lot of options, but that takes a lot of time and effort. And many of us are in situations where we don't have a huge budget and lots of assistance and people and time to work on things. So that's why I always encourage people to focus in. Where do your students always have problems or always get things wrong on the test or the quiz? That's a good place to start doing a little +1 thinking and doing some +1 design in what you've got in your content or representing information.
Can I just add one more thing as well, Thomas, around communication with your students? Like, you know, if everybody finds something really difficult, could you sit down with your students and actually ask them what would help everybody and get their buy-in in terms of what you could be doing?
Excellent, excellent. And that actually chimes with a couple of things I see in the chat. We've got a lot of chat features here, embedding UDL into planning, planning for interactions on people's mobile devices. Paula says in the chat she learned not to be frustrated by the lack of paid tool, but think about the smorgasbord. And by the way, you saw Dave shared a lot of different tools. You don't have to use lots of different tools. You find one or two different tools that help you do things in a way that you're comfortable with and that you can show your students how to use them. You don't want to overload yourself or your students.
I think that's really important. I think that's really important, Tom, just to point out that like the UDL does rely on the practitioner to interpret it for their own base of skills, their own context, their own learners, and that's a real kind of plus point of UDL because it engages the practitioners themselves in that kind of reflection and have to pick the tools that are going to work for them.
Yep, absolutely. Let me just run through a few of the chat features here too. We've got moving away from the usual PowerPoint and talk mode. Yeah, if you chunk things up into a couple of minutes here and a couple of minutes for them to take some actions, that increases their engagement. We talked about that in session 1. Olivia says, don't be afraid to try different ways to teach. And let's see. Shelfen says, learners may not have to disclose additional needs. Actually, as adults, they're not required to tell you if they have any challenges. And so this is a respectful way to help lower some barriers and help people not to have to put a hand up and say, hey, by the way, treat me differently. We're talking about the free tools, Microsoft Translator. I can't wait to explore the potential in Nearpod. Some people are getting excited about Dave's examples, the different apps and software, trying to engage people more. Here's some more Microsoft Translator things. Dipankar says, I was curious before, now I'm dying to jump in altogether. Know also that we have a community of people who are here who can support one another. And we're going to talk about how do we connect across different centers to people who are thinking about, trying, and actually doing. Let's see, thinking about outside the box in way of delivering a class. It doesn't need to be complicated. I love using A4 pages and big markers. Yep. And my one big thing was you address the problems of students not doing the work, which is very real. By the way, it's not a silver bullet. It's not going to solve the problem overnight. It is, however, going to allow students to have more ways of getting engaged and staying with the materials, especially when they're not there with you. So if they have more than one way, more than one choice, that really helps out a lot. I'm skimming through here to try to find some questions perhaps that people had for Dave. And I'd like to bring Dave back on and ask what his thoughts are about the UDL behind all of the things we've been talking about here. So Dave, if you'd like, come on and share your ideas and thoughts.
It's difficult because every day is different. Every week is different. Every year is different, and every student is different. So you know, what I do is I try and talk to each learner on, you know, individually and find out what it is that's going to get their juices flowing to learn a bit. And it can be quite difficult, and not everything works.
Oh, absolutely. And you're going to find that certain things work better than others. I'm wondering if you have a thought. Solomon posted in the chat. He says, I'm trying to get the concept of learning by accident, so letting my students discover things, versus learning by design in a more structural uptake of information. Is that a distinction that you found your learners benefit from having both?
I think by throwing in the simulator into the Nearpod was a great idea. Because they just like to play around with it. And for that particular class, they could see how the curve would change and how it would move around as they were playing with the numbers on it. So that was accidental learning. Mm-hmm. By wandering in and seeing a different notation as I was building that periodic table of mathematical symbols, and it was like, oh, well, what's that one about?
Yep. And I think Mary Byrne has something really powerful here. She's saying, in the past, I made different changes for individual learners with different challenges. In future, I'll put those in as options for the whole group. So if you have been working with students who require that one change one time for one person, chances are there are other people in the class who can benefit from having those same options. And so you can think +1, and that actually reduces barriers for everybody. Excellent. And I'm seeing a lot of people talking about using Translate, using Nearpod. Jessica says it was great to see and hear from Dave that the low-tech options work as well, especially as we build the digital literacy of our FET practitioners through ongoing professional development and using TEL tools like Nearpod. So excellent there. And let's see. Claire is saying using UDL consistently will lower the need to address accommodation needs for one learners with one specific things, avoiding our labor-intensive class preparation. Yep. And we've got a bunch of different ones that are mostly hooray Dave and hooray Microsoft Translator and hooray Nearpod, which is splendid. So thank you, Dave, for being here and sharing how you actually did it with your FET learners.
Nearpod owe me some money at this stage.
Apparently so, yeah. And we've got a couple of comments that we might close out with today. Jan says, the use of technology that fits in with what I already know and have learned from my students. So focusing your effort on what you see as patterns from your students. And by the way, if you don't know where your students are struggling, here's a pro tip. Ask them. They will tell you. If you literally say, what's your biggest struggle? What's your biggest stumbling point? They'll tell you. They'll absolutely know it. And we've got a bunch of different comments in here along those lines. So we're right here at time. I want to say thank you to everybody for being part of session 2. Remember that we have that activity for you for session 3 coming up between now and session 3. We'll see you next week, Monday at 2 o'clock Irish time. And I want to say thank you to Solace and to Ahead Ireland for sponsoring this. And I'll turn it over to Dara for some closing thoughts here.
Really interesting session. Thank you very much to everybody for participating and engaging so much in the chat on the Menti. I think we're gathering some lovely pictures from all of this work that will help us to bring it all together as threads as we move through the summer skills. So, Tom, I think you summed it mostly up very well yourself. So I think at this stage, right on time, as you always promise me we will, Tom, even though I tell you we tend in Ireland to slip a little bit one way or the other. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you all again on Monday. And keep an eye on your emails for those little post-session and pre-session exercises.